At the beginning of the Crusades, pilgrims making their way to the Holy Land faced treacherous travel conditions. They were ambushed by thieves or slaughtered by Muslim forces fighting to push the Christians out of the lands that they held sacred. Being a pilgrim on the road to Jerusalem came with huge risks, and many didn't make it to their destination alive. Even with God on their side, the pilgrims still needed someone to protect them. It was in 1119 that a French knight named Hugues de Payon offered his assistance to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem to solve this problem. He and 8 of his relatives and friends vowed to devote their lives to the glory of God by protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land. These men were willing to lay down their lives to defend the pilgrims, and all they wanted in return was to start their own monastic order. They would live as monks and take an oath of celibacy while also performing their duties as warriors for God. Many believed that these two lifestyles could never coexist, but Hugues de Payon made a strong case that there was a dire need for a protection force to take care of Christians traveling to and from the Holy Land. King Baldwin II agreed and granted Hugues de Payon and his knights their request to become the protectors of Christendom. He gave this new order of warrior monks a base of operations, and it's here in the heart of the Holy Land that the truly incredible story of the Knights Templar begins. Hugues de Payon and his new order of knights were given lodging in what was once King Solomon's temple. In the Bible, it's said that Solomon's temple was built on the spot where an angel appeared to King David. Legend also has it that the Ark of the Covenant, containing the 10 Commandments given to Moses by God, was held in a windowless sanctum in the temple known as the Holies of Holy. For millennia, the location of Solomon's temple had been seen as a holy site for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. Its lands have always been highly contested and covered with blood. When Hugues de Payon and his knights were given Solomon's temple, they were also dubbed the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. This later became shortened to Knights Templar or just Templars. Over the coming decades, a series of mysterious events would lead to a Templar empire that would grow from Europe into the Holy Lands. From their inception, the Knights Templar quickly gained prominence and respect throughout Christendom. There's been a lot of speculation that the Templars found something in the ruins of King Solomon's temple that allowed them to become so powerful so quickly. Perhaps it was a hidden chamber containing the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, or some other ancient Christian relic. But what if it was something more sinister? Maybe the Knights Templar uncovered something that would shake the bedrock of Christianity, such as documents of Jesus Christ having a wife and fathering children. These are fantastical ideas with no evidence to support them, but we do know that there is one thing that the Knights Templar found in Solomon's temple, and that was a place to recruit more knights and expand their influence. This was much more valuable than a holy relic, as it would be one of the key factors that would bring the Templars wealth and power. The temple also served as an excellent place to carry out initiation rites and to create secrets that would bind the Brotherhood together. When you think of a religious order, deadly soldiers probably aren't the first thing that comes to mind. However, this is exactly what the most powerful of the Knights Templar were. They fought with a fierceness that many believed was bestowed upon them by God, and this was one of the Knights Templar's greatest, darkest assets. Many truly believed that God was on their side, which gave them the will to fight and a true purpose in life, both of which were invaluable on the battlefield. Even though the Bible says thou shalt not kill, the Knights Templar were the exception, especially when it came to taking back and protecting the Holy Land. If the cause was just, the warrior monks were more than capable of unleashing justice upon their enemy. This was one aspect of the Knights Templar that made the order so feared. They rarely had to justify their actions, and although most of the time they just protected pilgrims and fought against Muslim forces, there were almost certainly instances where their deadly skills were used for less pious purposes. To solidify the Templars' right to fight and kill in the name of God, the Catholic Church gave them their official support and released a series of documents forgiving the Templars' sins. It's the military aspect of the Knights Templar that might have been the darkest part of the entire organization. They were not only skilled warriors, but for a bunch of monks that devoted themselves to God, they were incredibly brutal as well. When the Knights Templar were first founded, the men who joined only had the armor and weapons that they were bestowed upon by their families. The order itself was not wealthy, and therefore they could not procure new swords, armor, or horses that they had often desperately needed. Each brother was given a white tunic with a red cross on it to represent martyrdom, as they would likely die in battle. However, as more and more men joined their ranks and the Templars accumulated more and more wealth through donations and a series of secretive dealings, the Templars amassed immense wealth. As the Crusades progressed, the Knights Templar had the ability to purchase the necessary equipment to improve their effectiveness on the battlefield and slay their opponents with more efficiency. The Templar rules of engagement stated that they would never retreat if their banner was still visible on the battlefield. If the Templar flag ever did fall, the Knights would still continue fighting unless they were outnumbered at least 3-1. Even then, it was rare for a battalion of Knights Templar to retreat or give up their position. These tactics led to massacres on both sides and some horrifying outcomes. The Templars would continue to fight even if it seemed all was lost. They would bury their blood-soaked swords in the enemy until they were either forced to the ground or killed. Templars knew that if they were ever captured, it would mean certain death at the hands of the Muslims, as they were not only feared but hated with a passion by the enemy. Their tactics were incredibly effective, and the Knights Templar were often used as shock troopers. Again, this is an order of monks who devoted themselves to God but also seemed to have made a deal with death. They were unstoppable on the battlefield as they plowed through the enemy with their battle-hardened horses and heavy armor. Once the Templars broke the enemy line, they would continue their deadly assault through the ranks, slaughtering anyone in their path. The main ground forces would follow the Templar charge and engage the enemy from within their own ranks. This tactic worked time and again, as it seemed nothing could stop a Templar advance. Whether this was because of divine intervention or due to the Knights Templars' fearlessness as a result of knowing they would immediately be sent to heaven if they fell on the battlefield is still somewhat of a mystery. But there was another aspect of the Templar lifestyle that might have contributed to their brutality on the battlefield. These warrior monks were highly disciplined due to harsh penalties imposed on knights who did not follow orders. To be a Templar knight, you had to have blind devotion to not just God, but your commander as well. And this is where their actions became a little dark and somewhat questionable. Knights who did not follow orders were punished both physically and mentally. They would lose rank and be forced to prove their loyalty before returning to the battlefield. Depending on who the commander of a battalion was, self-flagellation might have been required if a knight wavered in his faith or devotion to the order. On top of this, if a knight retreated while his brothers continued to fight or did not follow the exact orders of his commander, his sword and horse could be taken away and he could be cast out of the order completely. For many, this was a fate worse than death, and although it seemed like the Templars were invincible, many did die. In fact, at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt, had 230 Templars beheaded in public to show his disdain for the Holy Order. Both Muslim and Christian military leaders were baffled by how the Templars always seemed to be growing in number. Some even believed there was some dark secret that kept new recruits coming in. Even though the order was relatively selective with who could join and what station they would hold in the organization, the ranks of the Knights Templar never seemed to diminish. Other orders of monks rarely received an influx of devoted recruits who wanted to give up all of their worldly possessions and live a life of chastity, but the Knights Templar always seemed to have new members begging to join. Maybe this was because the order was seen as being prestigious and a good way to ensure that your eternal soul found its way to heaven, or because the order had immense wealth and power. Either way, their numbers seemed to grow continually. In hindsight, it was likely a combination of these two factors that led to men from across Europe flocking to join the Knights Templar. Unfortunately, the power and wealth the Templars gained over the years would eventually be their downfall, but before the order was disbanded and its members beaten, tortured, and executed, the Knights Templar were able to amass a fortune bigger than any other holy order in history. There are countless theories on how the Knights Templar accumulated such wealth and what happened to it. Some of these theories show the darker side of the Templars, while others offer a much more economical explanation. Once the Knights Templar established themselves as the fiercest warriors in Christendom and started to gain more members and popularity, the order took control of key locations along trade routes to and from the Middle East. Just because the Crusades' main goal was to reclaim the Holy Land didn't mean that Europe's kings and church leaders weren't also trying to make a profit. Goods such as spices, relics, and other exotic products from Africa and Asia had to pass through the Holy Land to reach the rest of Europe. Since the Holy Order was originally created to protect pilgrims along these routes, they set up fortifications at key points. These castles and forts served as safe havens not just for the pilgrims but for merchants. Oftentimes, people seeking safety behind the walls of a Templar citadel would give donations to the order as a thanks for the services provided. This might have been one of the best-kept secrets of the Knights Templar at the time. Even though each individual Templar monk had to give up their possessions and couldn't own anything but their armor, weapons, and horses, the order itself was accumulating a massive amount of wealth and property via the protection they offered. But this wasn't the only way they made money. The Templar seal consisted of 2 knights riding on the same horse to represent the initial poverty of the order. The seal showed that the Knights Templar were so poor they could only afford a single horse for every 2 knights. Over time, this poverty turned into great wealth, and every knight ended up with multiple horses. But how did the Knights Templar accumulate so much wealth? Was it only through donations and support from the church and local rulers? Or was there a less savory way these monks gained their fortune? One of the reasons that the Templars were able to amass wealth was because of their close ties to the church. During the Crusades, the church was the most powerful entity in Europe. There were kings and rulers, but even they answered to the church. When Pope Innocent II issued a papal bull titled Omne Datum Optimum, it granted the Knights Templars a number of protections and exemptions that no one else had. This declaration laid the groundwork for the Templars to build their fortune. The papal bull stated that the Templars did not need to pay tithes or taxes to local warlords or kings, and that they were allowed to keep any and all spoils of war that they captured during battle. This was very different from everyone else who was required to give up a portion of their spoils of war to the church and to kings. Obviously, this was a point of contention, but as the Templars grew in power, most found it unwise to question the order. That being said, the Knights Templar also increased their wealth through other types of donations. Many believed that the order was necessary to ensure that Christianity maintained control of the Holy Land, and that anyone traveling in the area wouldn't be able to do so without fear of being raided or killed by the enemy if the Templars were not around. It also is highly likely that anyone who was saved by the Templars during a Muslim attack felt indebted to the order and gave large sums of money to show their appreciation. If nothing else, donating to the Knights Templar was a good way to get in the good graces of God, as they seemed to be his chosen warriors. But it wasn't just coins and valuable goods that were donated to the order. Landowners would give large amounts of property to the Templars to show their appreciation and respect to the order. The combination of monetary and land donations created a Templar empire that spanned across Europe and into the Holy Land. Many pilgrims and merchants used this network to travel, always knowing that there would be a Templar stronghold to spend the night in, where they'd be safe from the dangers of the outside world. This shows the goodness of the Knights Templar and that they were serving their purpose just as Hugues de Payens and the original 9 Knights had set up the order to do. However, as the Templar Empire grew, it adopted another purpose, one that made the order wealthier than almost all other organizations in Christendom. Ironically, the purpose they served is seen by many as a sinister one today due to the way they conducted business. Not everyone who devoted their lives to the Templars could be a knight. In fact, during the height of the order, knights made up the smallest portion of Templar numbers. In order to be a Templar knight, a recruit had to come from a family who already had members who were knighted. They also had to be of legitimate birth, which was not as common as you might think at the time. Once someone joined the order, they had to swear an oath of celibacy and devote their life to God. Interestingly, married men could join the order, but they were required to get the permission of their spouse. However, married men could not wear the white mantle of the Knights Templar, as it was seen as a sign of chastity and purity. All recruits also needed to be in good financial standing. If they were in debt, they would be turned away. More often than not, a sizable donation would be made to the order by the recruit or their family when entering the order. It should be noted that the men who joined the Knights Templar were human and therefore not perfect. There's no doubt that some of the members were not good people and that they broke their vows. In reality, it's unlikely everyone stayed celibate and resisted temptations during their time in the order. It's not out of the realm of possibility that the knights engaged in carnal delights with prostitutes, prisoners, and even other knights. Obviously, this was frowned upon at the time and went against everything that the church and the order stood for, but humans are human, and preaching abstinence almost never works. Anyone not of knightly descent who wanted to join the Templars was indoctrinated as sergeants who served the order in several different capacities. Sergeants were responsible for making sure that the horses were fed, the knights' equipment was always combat ready, and the necessary religious duties were carried out. They also maintained the grounds, farmed, and completed any other tasks that the leaders of the order needed to be done. Having a large labor pool that didn't need to be paid meant the Templars could save money and invest it in ways that would allow their wealth to grow. As donations came in, the Templars would buy revenue-generating properties like farms, vineyards, and churches. But the most lucrative part of the Templar business was their banking practices. Many wealthy merchants or nobles knew that the Templar castles and communities were safe places to store their money and valuables. Having a large amount of money in their vaults at any given time meant the Templars could give out loans with interest rates that were manageable but still increase their wealth. This might seem like an odd thing for a religious organization to do, but the church had been loaning money to kings and nobles to fight wars for decades. The Templars just found ways to do it better. A pilgrim or merchant could deposit their money at a Templar stronghold in one part of Europe and then withdraw it from a different convent on the other side of the continent. All the person would need was an official letter from one of the brothers at the original location bearing the Templar seal, and they could use the different convents similar to how we use ATMs today. By the end of the 13th century, the Templars had grown into one of the most respected banking and military organizations in the world. But like with all financial institutions and money-making ventures, there's often a dark side. The Templars were not always forgiving to people who defaulted on their loans or were unable to prove that they had deposited money with the organization. The last thing you'd want is a fully armed Templar knight showing up at your house to collect the debt you owed to the order. While the Templars were brilliant bankers and deadly warriors, their selection process and criteria limited their options regarding new recruits. However, this problem was easily overcome thanks to their immense wealth. The Order of Devout Monks often hired mercenaries to help fight in their campaigns. These recruits would not become part of the order but would be paid by the Templars to follow them into battle. Most often, mercenaries were hired as infantry or archery units. The mercenaries were not held to the high moral standards the Knights in the Order were, but they were relied upon as support and were a vital part of the Templar army. Hiring mercenaries was a common way of fighting war for most of human history. The Templars were likely no different, even though they were a religious order and some of the main tenets of Christianity are forgiveness and having compassion for others, but as you know, the Knights Templar didn't always adhere to these teachings. During the Crusades, the Church and many Christians believed that captured enemies could be converted to Christianity and their souls could be saved. The Knights Templar did not feel this way. They would often slaughter every enemy soldier they came across and anyone who aided them, even if they had surrendered. Many Templars believed that Muslims were unworthy of salvation, and it was their duty sworn to God to eradicate them from the face of the earth. During the Crusades, there were accounts of Templars slaughtering entire groups of people who had surrendered after a battle. This darker side of the Knights Templar is rarely talked about, but just like other points of history, war makes people do terrible things. An organization such as the Knights Templar that spanned across borders, had immense wealth, and whose job was to protect Christians in the Holy Land needed to be led by someone powerful. In the Templar Order, the Grand Master was the one who oversaw everything. He made all of the important decisions and knew every one of the Templar's secrets. He was aided by his commanders, but his rule over the order was absolute. The old saying, "Power corrupts," applies to Templars as well. When someone was indoctrinated into the Knights Templar, they were required to promise their loyalty and obedience to the Grand Master. Aside from serving God, this was their most important oath. To disobey the Grand Master meant to forfeit your rights as a member of the order. Any Templar who went against the Grand Master could be beaten, tortured, and thrown into prison for life. Obedience to the Grand Master of the organization was not optional, whether you agreed with the way he was running things or not. The darkest time for the Knights Templar came in 1307. It was at this point that horrendous accusations started to arise about the order. The rumors were started by King Philip IV of France, a jealous king who was deeply in debt to the Templars. The accusations, some of which may have been true but most were almost certainly not, included idolatrous worshipping of a bearded male head called Baphomet, spitting and urinating on the cross, and of course sodomy. These rumors were almost undoubtedly lies, but it didn't matter. King Philip IV had made up his mind, and in his eyes the Knights Templar were an enemy of the state and a threat to Christianity. There was only one thing to do, and that was to eradicate the order from existence. Even though it was Philip who led the charge against the Templars, many kings and rulers in Europe were becoming nervous about the power the Templars wielded. Many believed the Knights Templar had too much power, too much money, and too much favor with the Church. It was no secret that the Knights Templar were one of the most influential organizations in Europe. They were accused of corruption and of extortion of nobles and kings. Whether this was true or not can be debated, but the Knights Templar most likely did use their wealth and power to maneuver political dealings in what they saw was the right direction. It's more likely than not that the order started by 9 knights to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land during the Crusades had their own views of what Christendom should become. On Friday, October 13th, King Philip IV ordered the arrest of the Knights Templar in France. Their lands were seized, and the brothers of the order were thrown into jail. It's a mystery as to why the Templars didn't fight back, but it likely had to do with the fact that they didn't think the king would do anything so drastic and that their forces were spread out across the empire. However, one group of Templars did resist capture at their castle in Aragon, France, for several months. Initially, Pope Clement V tried to stop the unsubstantiated attacks and arrests being carried out against the Templars. However, using torture, King Philip forced false confessions from several Templars, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay, that the members of the order engaged in desecrating the cross. Many of the Templars in France were sentenced to death. Jacques de Molay, along with 54 brothers, were burnt at the stake in Paris in 1310. Some of the Knights Templar had escaped to other parts of Europe, where they went into hiding, and on April 3, 1312, the Pope officially disbanded the Knights Templar, not because they were found guilty of any crimes, but because their reputation had been damaged beyond repair. This brings us to one of the biggest mysteries of all. What happened to all of the wealth the Knights Templar had accumulated? Some claim that a Templar fleet sailed west from Europe and landed in the Americas, where they buried their treasure, but there is zero evidence that this ever happened. Others believe that they smuggled their treasure into Scotland and hid it somewhere in the Scottish Isles. This theory also has little to no evidence in its favor. What we do know is that everything that was seized from the Templars by the Church was given to the Knights Hospitaller on May 2, 1312. The Hospitallers were another religious order that was founded in 1099, around 20 years before the Templars. They eventually became a military order that followed a very similar structure to the Knights Templar. However, the Hospitallers are rarely talked about in history, even though they too amassed great wealth and treasure during the Crusades. In fact, the Knights Hospitallers are still operating today in Malta. Perhaps the secrets and the treasure of the Knights Templar was never lost. Perhaps they were just transferred to the Hospitallers in 1312 and have been guarded by the Order ever since. Unfortunately, the secrets of the Knights Hospitallers is a topic for another video. Now watch Medieval Knights Were Not Noble But Cold-Hearted Killers, or watch The Antichrist Explained.